on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Jacob. We got a good episode lined up for you this week. I know I say that every week, but it's the truth. I get to give a few podcast plugs. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Conversations with Jacob podcast. At one time it was YT, but I changed it. I changed it yesterday to podcast. So you can type in Conversation with Jacob podcast on Facebook. Twitter is CWJ podcast. I think, could be wrong, but you can check out. You can check it out on our website, which is Conversations with Jacob podcast.weebly.com. Podcasts and platforms include iHeartRadio, Amazon, and we're on Audible, Pandora, TuneIn, 20 different podcasts and platforms, which is just too hard to keep up with at this point. Our website, you can find posts from the host, my little idea thing here where I post what I want. You can find upcoming schedule, past guests, and also I'm appearing on podcasts now, talk about my stuff. So there's an appearance page on there for me if you guys want to check out my podcast appearances. So, with that being said, my guest this week is Juliette Watt. She's a former Playboy bunny, and she also has a book, In Between the Magic. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Now, I guess to jump right into the interview here, and how did you become a Playboy bunny?
Well, it was in London, and it was just my mother and I, and my mother was not a well person. She was pretty mentally difficultly distraught, and she managed to lose every penny we had, so I had to get a job super fast. And it just so happened that Playboy had been open in London for about a year. This was 1967. And it was the highest paying job in Playboy in London at the time. So my mother altered my birth certificate slightly, and I went in there for an interview and got the job, mainly for the money, I'll be very honest. And it was just sort of a need for survival, for want of a better word. So yes, I just went in there and kind of auditioned with a bunch of girls and got the job, not knowing what the job was, because I didn't know how to deal roulette or blackjack, or I'd never been a waitress. I'd never done anything like that. So it was pretty interesting.
So did you like doing it?
The work was intensely hard. They were long hours. You're standing in 4-inch stiletto heels, and you're having to work super hard in a very uncomfortable costume. So the physicality of it, no, not a bit. We worked 8-hour shifts, and it was a 24-hour club. So you had either whatever shift they gave you, and it could be a midnight to 8, which was brutal. But the girls that I worked with were some of the finest women I've ever known, just hardworking girls trying to make a living and stay alive. And so the people were great. The work was somewhat miserable.
Now, how long did it last between when you started and when you left?
I was there for 3 years in London. And then we all moved to Istanbul, Turkey. And so then the next time I was anywhere near Playboy was when I moved to the United States in 1976. And I moved in with Hugh Hefner's girlfriend, Sandra. And then I was up at Hef's mansion, and I was with the Playboy crowd all the time. And then I got a job singing with them, because then I was a nightclub singer by then.
Now, did you ever meet Hugh Hefner?
Yes, I saw him every day.
So, and what kind of person was he like?
Terrible. He was terrible. He was to the unknown person who didn't know him and what he did behind the scenes, so to speak. He was very pleasant, very polite. He was an extremely clever man. He was very bright. I will say that he was a genius in what he actually invented. And, with the magazine and the clubs and everything, it was brilliant. But as a human being, he was a disgrace. He was awful. He treated women abhorrently. What he did to some of the girls is is unmentionable. There is I will promote this because it's a very important program for people to watch on A&E. It's called Secrets of Playboy. And if there's anything you ever wanted to know about Hugh Hefner and that whole life up there, it's in brutal black and white. And yes, he was not a good man, for want of a better word.
All right, so it was like two different sides,
Yeah.
that people saw.
Oh, sure. Sure. They saw the businessman, and then we saw, the other guy.
How about that? Now, and how did your book come to be Between the Magic?
I have led a very interesting life. It's somewhat unbelievable, some of it, because my mother, as I said, was mentally not there. She was very mentally ill. And back in those days, Jacob, there was nothing really to help anybody. We had no therapists. We had no medication. Nobody talked about mental health back in the 60s. So if there was, something wrong with you, you were alone. So I spent all my life basically surviving. My mother and I moved to Istanbul. Then I couldn't sort of take it there anymore because we had no money. We became very ill with yellow jaundice. So I moved to Beirut, and the time I moved to Beirut, it just happened to be before the 1972 war, which was intense. And so I lived through that war and came back to London, and then managed to get myself almost abducted into Abu Dhabi with Arabs who were coming to London by the barrel load in those days because oil had just started popping out of the ground. So a lot of young girls were disappearing. And so I happened to make friends with the wrong young lady and got myself abducted over there. I managed to get out of that. I'm not sure if I killed a man, actually, to be honest. And then lots of other things happened. I went to Belgium, Liège, and had a very unfortunate encounter and managed to find the guy and put him into prison. So it's a series. The book is a series is my life, is a book about survival and how you survive in literally the face of all adversity and how anybody can. Because I'm really just an ordinary person, but it just so happened I had an extraordinary life,
Now, where can people purchase the book at?
They can purchase it on Amazon or where any other books are sold, like Barnes and Noble and that. But I think Amazon seems to be the most popular one. And I'd like folk to understand that it's really yes, it's a book of adventures. There's a lot of funny stuff in it, a lot of kind of scary, horrific stuff. But the message in there that I really wanted to convey to women was, hey, listen, no matter what happens to you, you yourself, every single one of us, have the resources to get past it and to literally triumph from it. So instead of becoming a victim and, like all of the girls that suffered under Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein and all these poor girls, they couldn't do that. They couldn't get back at him. They couldn't finish the story. I finished every one of my stories, and it made me much stronger. And I'm deeply grateful for that. And I want that when people read it, that they see that in it, along with all the mad adventures and insanity. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Now, and what is compassion fatigue, and how does one overcome it?
Compassion fatigue, in one sentence, is basically when you lose yourself in who you're becoming for either someone else or everyone else. So this applies to people that take care of people at home. Like if you've got grandma at home, or if you've got mom at home, or dad, and they're going into dementia and they're going into Alzheimer's, and all of a sudden your life has ended as you know it, because now you are a caregiver. You are a caretaker of this person, of your family, that you feel some obligation and duty to look after, which is a very difficult thing, because in that process, you're 24/7 on this person and you disappear. Do you know what I mean? Your whole identity just goes in the back burner. Anything, your job and everything, you have to now navigate that around looking after this person. And it does a number on you. It starts to drain you. You lose who you are. You lose any thought of yourself, as in from appearance to health, everything. If you go into what's called burnout, in other words, if you know, like a lot of nurses during COVID, to give you an example, they were working extraordinarily hard and ridiculously long hours beyond their capabilities as a human. When then you go into burnout, because you can't just say, well, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. You can't do that. So burnout is when suicide happens, drug abuse happens, alcoholism happens, because you just want to numb the pain of the deadness that you feel. And it's an insidious condition because not many people know about it. And it's one of those things that you're in the middle of this caregiving of whatever it may be, and you feel terrible and you're so depressed and you don't know why, because you never used to be like this. This isn't you. And there's no real, and has not been, I think it's getting a little better now, but when I did my TED Talk in 2018, nobody knew what it was, which I think I'm really happy I was able to do that talk so that people, you know, I got so many feedbacks from folks saying, oh my goodness, that's what's wrong with me. Okay, thank you. So I ended up coaching a lot of people. I have a lot of coaching clients that I help through this, because it's terrible when you feel awful and you don't know why, you know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, and what advice would you give people that feels trapped in life?
You have to put yourself first. And most people don't do that. And I'm saying put yourself first, I mean in front of your children. You become first. Your children, your family, everything else becomes second, third, fourth, and fifth. And I don't know hardly anyone that would agree with me. I have a few people that go, yes, you're right. But most of the time people look at me in shock and horror, because it's like, no, I have to put my children first. No, you don't. Absolutely not. And that's kind of almost the worst thing you can do. You know, no matter what it is, you must look after yourself first, because if you don't, how on earth, in that state that you then become, how are you going to look after anybody else? You're a mess, and you don't feel good, and you have no ambition, and you have no life, you have no friends anymore. It's dreadful how quickly that demise happens. So that's my main advice is, you know, decide, like, I don't know, maybe there's one day or one afternoon in the week that is yours. You have nobody around you that has anything to do with your family or any obligations that you may have. You know what I mean? Go out with a friend or something.
Now, do you think with people putting their self first before their children, do you think that is set like a good example?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it sounds terrible, doesn't it? But it sounds awful, because people look at me in absolute horror. And I say, I'm not saying, you know, kick the kids out on the street. I'm not saying that, or don't feed them anymore because you don't have time. I don't mean that. I mean, when it comes to your own personal feelings and health, you go, okay, I am running myself ragged, taking the kids to soccer practice, to this, to that, to the other, feeding them. Then I've got the husband that comes home at the end of the day. Just take a minute and go, you know what? I'm going to get some help. And if you do feel overwhelmed and you do feel alone in this, and there's a great sense of solitude, ask for help. And no one does that anymore either. Be it a friend, be it a therapist, somebody.
Now, can you tell us about escaping the dangers of the civil war in Beirut?
In Beirut?
Yeah, how the Civil War. Yeah,
How did I get out of it, or what was the
yeah,
Civil War?
and how you escaped it. Yeah,
Oh, do you know anything? Are you familiar with what happened over there at the end of the 70s?
not really. That was before my time.
Oh, I didn't know whether you had family or you knew anything. It was a pretty awful situation. Just very briefly, so that folk know a little bit of what happened. The Palestinians, of course, used to occupy Israel. It used to be called Palestine. And then when it became Israel, the Palestinians then became refugees. Unfortunately, they went all over the place trying to find a place to live. And a lot of them came to the Lebanon, where they were invited in as guests. And unfortunately, the Lebanese government at that time was Christian, which means that they did not want I mean, Beirut was a humongously tourist, fabulous place. I mean, it was called the Paris of the East for a good reason. So what the president did was he pushed everybody, all the Palestinians, into ghettos, basically, so that nobody would see them. And you can't do that to a people. You cannot do that. Eventually, the boil will burst. And it did, because there was a man called Yasser Arafat, who was the leader of the Palestinians. And he decided that it was now or never. And he started taking pot shots, literally lobbing mortars over to Israel from the shores of Lebanon because they border each other. And then the Israelis decided that that wasn't going to work for them. And they flew over and did sort of a really bad massacre roundup of all the Palestinians that they could find in Beirut, just to sort of teach them a lesson. And then, of course, Palestinians being Muslim and a lot of Christian people there, all in the same family sometimes, you then had civil war because it escalated into most of the Muslims who unfortunately were not treated as well as they should have been. They were more in the, caretakers and concierges and that kind of bit. They just riled up. And civil war happened, and it was just awful. You had brother against brother. You had family against family. It was all of a sudden, and you had young kids, teenage kids with, machine guns in their hands. They didn't know what they were doing. It lasted for 2 years of just horrific warfare. And I was there. I was singing in a nightclub, and I was sort of weaving my way around at night because I had a permit. And it got to a point where, of course, I had to get out because the country was crumbling. So I had a dear friend who was a dancer, an Arabic dancer, and he managed to procure a taxi from somebody, who knows. I mean, you have to understand the Middle Eastern way of thinking. You have a friend who has a friend who has a friend.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it goes into that sort of, and he procured this taxi, and I was laying on the bottom of the taxi, and he was like kind of laying sideways driving, and the airport was open for 1 hour one day, and we had to get there. And we did, and there were holes in the taxi by the time we got there, but I literally got in through the glass sliding doors as they were closing, as the airport was closing and the last flight was leaving. And I just remember him at the window waving at me. It was sort of heartbreaking because I knew I'd never, ever see him again. And yes, it was very sad. I lost a great amount of friends in that. And it was it was just senseless. It was a pointless war that's still going on, for God's sake,
Did you
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Did you ever think that you would escape it, or did you think that you would be there forever?
No, I have never had any doubt. I knew I would be able to. It was just a matter of being patient, finding the right time. And that's the thing, Jacob. I have never in my life said, I better give up on this. It's not going to work. I've never done that. I have never been a victim. I have never felt, oh God, I don't know what to do. I've always had a plan. And if plan A doesn't work, B, C, or D will. But no, never crossed my mind that anything would happen to me. Because I kind of knew everybody, and you kind of get this circle of folk that you knew, even the bad guys. I knew some of them too, which was handy. You know what I mean? But no, I think that's the whole thing about becoming resilient. There comes times in your life where you can't just sit down and go, well, I can't do this. It's too scary, or it's too this, Don't you get up and do it. If it scares you, do it.
Now, and what was the relationships? What was the relationships in London like in the 60s?
Fabulous. It was the greatest. Fabulous. As you may have read or not, Cat Stevens was my the love of my life, actually, to be honest. He was my boyfriend, and I was with him for a long time, and then we had a gap, and then I was with him again when he was in Los Angeles, and he was super famous, and also when he decided to become a Muslim himself. But we were all together in the 60s. He was just up and coming, and we had a whole little group of friends. It was just tremendously safe, Jacob. I mean, we would go out at night. Everybody in London, all the pop stars would be walking around, the Gibbs and Barry and all those guys, Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, the Animal. I mean, there was no danger. And I know that sounds crazy. Yes, people did get murdered, robbed, but you could walk about as a young woman at night in your party dress. No one would hurt you. You were completely safe. We used to go to nightclubs together. We used to, it was the greatest time, I believe. And I think other people have agreed. It was the greatest time. I think it was the same in America, the late 60s, early 70s. Y'all were running around here having a wonderful time with flowers and whatnot, right? So it was the same in London. The only difference is between us and you guys is you had the Vietnam War that hung over you like this dreadful cloud. We did not have that. We just had party time. And it was safe. And I have to say, I am truly grateful that I grew up and I was a young woman during that time, because today I fear for young people today. I really, really do. It's scary out there.
Now, do you think, with the relationships in London from the 60s to now, do you think that's changed a bit?
Yeah, yes, it has. There's an element of trust that's gone. There's an element, your word is your bond no longer. Just people have become scared. They have become so careful. You have to be careful you don't offend somebody with telling them, I don't know, your beard's too long. I mean, something as silly as that, you know what I mean, can get you into great trouble. Back in the day, I think the difference is, okay, so when I was young, I used to sing in nightclubs. That was basically my career. My bum used to get pinched. I used to get remarks about, hey, honey, why don't you? It didn't bother me, but I'm not damaged. Guys are being guys. That's what guys do. Today, poor things, they're persecuted because of it. And I feel we've gone too far. We've gone into a pious nation of carefulness, and nobody answers a question straight on. See, the beauty of being my age, Jacob, no filter,
Yeah.
darling. I have no filter, darling. It's gone, gone, because I can do that now, but I know it's very hard for folk today. So to answer your question, yes, I believe it has changed 360 degrees.
Right. Now, when did you become I guess, obsessed with writing?
It was the one thing I loved to do, and I knew I did it well, only because I just could, you do something well when you're doing it and you love it and you do it for free. I always ask people, well, what would you do if you weren't getting paid that you would just be thrilled doing? And it was writing for me. I started off by writing plays. I wrote plays for the theater. And then I was married before, and we broke up, and I had to get a job quickly. So, it was back in the late 80s where it was really hard. Everything was so expensive. Your mortgage was ridiculous. So I decided to get a job as a soap opera writer. So I got a job for ABC Television, and I wrote One Life to Live for a while, and then another soap. And I became quite good at writing. And I have to credit soaps for that, because you have to write a 92-page script in 3 to 4 days and have it delivered, edited to the head writer. You better, brevity is definitely the soul of keeping your job, for sure. So I would learn how to say something succinctly without waffling, because if I waffled, the red pen would go straight through it from the head writer. So from that, I became very proficient at getting to the point, getting in and getting out, and not doing what a lot of writers do, which is blah, 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 waffle on. So then I didn't actually decide to write this book. People were annoying me by telling me to write it because of the kind of life I've had. And I said, I really don't want to, because I don't think anyone's going to believe a single word. It's crazy. And I just had a lot of people going, you got to write it. Anyway, I said, okay, I'll try. Because I really, Jacob, did not feel I had any talent at all for writing a book. And it was very strange. I sat down and I wrote the first line, and boom, off we went. And I was actually enjoying it, because I didn't think I was going to, because I was dragging up all this stuff from the past with my mother and the terrible things my mother had done to me. And I had this catharsis going through, and I thought, well, it's down on paper. And maybe this will help some people who've had a mother like mine, or have been in hairy situations a bit like I was, maybe not in a Beirut war, but, just situations where they were scared. And I'm hoping that will resonate with folk when they read it. But that's how I got to write it, under protest, basically.
Now, and how long did it take you to write your book, that In Between the Magic?
4 years.
4 years.
Hmm. George Bernard Shaw said something very interesting for all those writers out there. He said, I hate writing, but I love having written. And that is a very truthful statement. It's a long and painful and lonely process. But when you've done it, you go, wow, that feels good, you know?
Now, and now you was a stunt writer at one time, correct?
I was. I know. Yes, I was. Hmm. Hmm.
And
See what I mean, Jacob? Did you see what I'm talking about? It's like, okay, so there's that. Okay, we can talk about it.
yeah, and how did that come into play?
I had a horse that my mother refused to pay for anymore. And so where I kept my horse in London was just outside of London. Um, we were right next door to MGM Studios. And back in those days, they were making a lot of horsey movies in the sense of they were making things like Charge of the Light Brigade, International Velvet, a lot of things that involved horses. So they wanted stunt riders, especially for Charge of the Light Brigade, which involved huge armies coming over the hill. And I was a very good rider. I was 14, I was skinny, and I didn't care, and I had no fear. Remember those days when we had no fear? Anyway, so I was paid about $7 a day to ride very big horses in full coats of armor. I was in full armor. And back in the day, nowadays, I think they make it out of aluminum and very lighter stuff. But back in the day, these suits of armor were real. I mean, they were made out of steel. And those suckers weighed a couple 100 pounds. I mean, so I would be on a horse, and then the director would say, okay, we want you to gallop down the hill. We want you to fall on that spot into the water around the tree. And I would do that and pay for my horse, and, you know, end up in the hospital 2 or 3 times, having to have stitches and whatnot. And finally, my mother put an end to that because she gave my horse. She actually had my horse slaughtered at the slaughterhouse down the road, and said I wasn't going to go up there anymore, and I couldn't do that anymore. But I did it for about a year, and I had a ball.
So I take it that you like animals.
Yes. Well,
Because,
we have
uh,
them here.
because on your website it says you got 3 horses, 5 dogs, 4 goats, and a barn cat.
Okay, we have changed that now. We have 3 horses. We have 2 dogs, but we're going to have a third. We've rescued a third, and I have 2 goats.
All right, so the numbers kind of went down some.
They did. They changed. Well, the little goaties that we had back then passed away, so we got more little goaties because the goats and the horses are great friends, and the dogs, we lost a few dogs in a couple of years. It was awful. So we always rescue a dog every now and again, you know, just so we usually don't have more than 3 in the house. But yeah, that's what we do. I mean, both of us, my husband and I, worked at an animal sanctuary for 10 years in Utah called Best Friends Animal Sanctuary. And so we learned a lot about homeless animals.
Now, was I also seeing something on your website about something with Hurricane Katrina?
Yes. We were working for Best Friends Animal Society, and Katrina hit in 2005 in August. And a few days later, a team of us from Best Friends went down to New Orleans and set up camp just outside of New Orleans in Macomb, Mississippi, it's actually Tylertown. It was a little tiny town, but it was across the Pontchartrain, so it was out of the city. And we set up a rescue facility there. And I flew my airplane down there. We know I fly, right? Did we talk about the fact that I'm a pilot?
Not yet, but go ahead.
Okay, so I took my own airplane down there because it would be handy to fly everybody around. And we stayed a year down there in Katrina. I think Best Friends rescued around 6,000 animals that passed through over the year. But I used to fly animals to different other shelters to give us some space because we were getting close to 200 dogs, cats, and whatnot per night pulled off the streets of New Orleans. It was awful. And so I would do my best. We would do our best to kind of get these animals to other shelters to maybe be adopted because we suddenly realized no one was coming to get them. You know, when the storm was over and everything, no one was coming to get their dogs because everybody had moved away. So we had this abundance of animals, and it was hard work. But I flew a family of tarantula spiders once to tarantula rescue in Alabama. That was yeah, and I would fly dogs and cats and rabbits, and we had a boa constrictor that had to go to snake rescue or wildlife rescue, So that was very educational in a sense of how animals were treated and where they fell in the pecking order of family. And unfortunately, we saw that they didn't fall anywhere. And I think, thankfully, the law has changed now to where any kind of national disaster like that happens, you can take your animal with you, because it was shocking, Jacob. It was just shocking. Animals were tied up to, railings and stuff because the people thought they were coming back in a couple of days. How they thought that, I never quite knew, because the water was already 7 feet deep. I mean, it was up to the third story of buildings. So that was Katrina. That was quite an amazing time.
Now, next question is, when and why did you become a pilot? Kind of goes into the last question, I guess.
My father used to build airplanes. My father was Turkish, and he used to build airplanes for the CIA, actually, in Turkey. And I've always had a love of airplanes. I've always thought they're quite the most magnificent thing, that something so huge could get off the ground and fly so gracefully, So after my stint at soap operas in New York, now we're now talking after the book, okay? Because the book ends when I'm 28. And now this is later. I was in New York at that time. And I'd finished writing the soap operas. I'd got married again and moved out to New Jersey. And on our honeymoon, we had gone to Jamaica. And they have a little bitty airport right where we were in Negril. And if you didn't want to take the horrendously difficult, scary bus from Monterey, Mobay to Negril, you flew. And you could have this little flight and I thought, and I would watch the airplanes coming over the beach, and I thought, that's what I'm going to do next. I think I'll do that. And then I realized that I had to have a purpose for doing it, and it took me 2 years to get all my licenses. And I decided that animal rescue would be the way to go. And so it ended up that I was starting that in New Jersey. Then we moved to Utah to work at Best Friends. And I was very helpful to them because I could fly animals in bulk, so to speak. I could fly rabbits, I could fly dogs and cats. I could go down and pick them up in Florida and be back the next day, and it became really useful. So I used to fly almost every other day somewhere with some group of animals behind me. We rescued a lot of parrots as well that come smuggled in, and there's a big parrot black smuggling trade, and so stuff like that. So that's how I used the airplane, because a lot of my friends and a lot of people and a lot of students that I taught, because I became a flight instructor, they had these airplanes really fancy with all the gear in it, and they only ever flew to lunch, So I wanted to have a purpose. I couldn't just go and fly around. Plus, burning gas like that, it was silly. So I decided, what do I love more than anything else? Animals and rescuing them. So I thought, well, let's try that.
Now, do you still fly today?
I do not. I had to make the choice between airplanes and horses. And they cost about the same. In fact, my poor husband just believes that horses are more expensive. But yes, and also where we live now in Colorado, there's no real purpose to have an airplane. There really isn't. So I have horses and I compete on my horses in competitions, which is about the same cost as an airplane. It may even be a little more.
Now, going back to the animal sanctuaries, yes. Do you think that has kind of changed from when you was doing it to now? Do you think it changed, or do you think it's still the same?
No, actually, it's changed for the better. Best Friends are the most amazing people. They're the most amazing organization in the world. They went from a kind of grassroots, 5 people decided they'd put up a few, kennels on 3,000 acres, which has now become a multi-million-dollar operation. But the beauty of them is that they use their money to do good work, and it has Well, I think when Best Friends started, and I may be wrong in my numbers, so forgive me, I think there were 15 to 17 million homeless animals at that time. And right now, I think there's between 5 and 6, which people will say, well, there's still 5 and 6. But yeah, that's a great deal of difference. Best Friends is implemented many different ways of fostering and adopting, which has permeated other rescues. And I think people are now less intimidated by adopting a rescue animal. You know, I've just adopted a horse that's perfectly nice. He's a purebred Arabian. Nobody wanted him because they were scared of him. Well, there was nothing wrong with him. He was just lonely and fed up. And right now he's like a puppy dog. So I think people don't understand that a rescue animal is as good as a better than a bought animal, because every time you breed, you're putting more animals into the shelters, in my opinion. So I think the education, Jacob, of rescuing has improved. And I think the facilities are improving. Some are, of course, dreadful, and they will always be dreadful. And there's nothing you can do about that. But I think in general, we are becoming more aware. And organizations such as Best Friends really have enlightened the world. I mean, they have done extraordinary things and continue to do so. I believe, if I'm not wrong, they have turned Los Angeles into a whole no-kill town, which is huge. Puppy mills, that's another thing that has really been, focused on breeding people. Then you've got dog fighting. You know, Michael Vick was one of our rescue deals, and that was a big wake-up call for the world because he was famous. So little things like that. Yes, it has changed, and it's changed for the better, definitely.
Now, when you go and adopt a horse or purchase a horse, do you get one that's already tamed, or do you get one then tame it?
There's two answers. I am too old. I am too old to start a new horse. I am too old to take a baby and bring it up, and because that requires a young person with a strong body that can fall off 200 or 300 times and be fine. I can't do that. But I have taken in a wild Mustang who passed away last year, but he passed away at 37 years old, which is pretty darn good. So I took him in, and he was basically untouched by humans. And we got to a point where he and I were friends. I would never ride him. I would never do anything with him other than groom him and be friends with him and turn him into what we call a pasture pal. But this horse was my best friend. So he would be considered wild. But to be truthful, Jacob, there are no wild horses in America. They're feral horses. So the true wild horse is not here. Would I take another one like that? Absolutely, just to give them a home, because the Mustang situation here is pretty dire. They keep rounding them up and they have nowhere to go, and there's hundreds and hundreds of them. And my other two horses are show horses that I did buy for that purpose. But I bought them from very good people whom I know well, and I know their reputation well. But yes, a bit of both, actually. If I was 20, sure, I'd have a little baby and bring one up because there's nothing better. But I'm afraid the bones won't hold up to that.
And what is your favorite adventure and why?
My favorite what?
What is your favorite adventure and why?
Adventure?
Yeah, adventure.
Oh. Shoot. Well, I've done so many adventures. I think my, you know what? I think my favorite one was going into the animal world and understanding how horses think and how dogs think and how actually to work with them. When we went to Best Friends, my husband and I were pretty clueless about dogs and especially horses. I mean, I'd ridden horses since I was a kid, but I didn't know how they thought. We didn't learn that back in the day. So I think it was an adventure of learning, basically. And now we understand them. We understand the way they think. I understand the way horses think, and it's not how most people do. You know, we get to understand their minds and what is important to them, and the fact that they don't actually love us, but there is respect and there is loyalty. Dogs love us because they're a predator, and a horse is a prey animal. So you have to learn that difference. And that has been an adventure. And the adventure was going to Best Friends. throwing show business behind us. Because my husband does voiceovers for television commercials and stuff. He threw that behind him and became a videographer at Best Friends. And we literally went into the sticks and the wilds of Utah. And that was, I think, my most favorite scary adventure in leaving New York City and everything we knew behind and going into that world. Was people thought we were mad, but thank God we did it, you know.
Now, do you think people that has a dog or a cat or even a horse that they kind of don't, that they don't understand the way they feel or maybe the way they think?
Some people, I mean, I know a lot of people that are really savvy about horses, but they're in the horse world. A lot of people, a lot of people do misunderstand because they get very anthropomorphic. You know, they put human feelings on animals, like saying things like, well, the dog pooped in the house on purpose. No, he didn't. No animal does anything on purpose. They don't calculate because they don't have that rationale to go, if I do this, then she'll understand I don't like being left alone. Yeah, he probably did it because he was left alone for too long and had to go to the bathroom. But that's what people get angry with animals, and they shouldn't, because animals live in the moment. And for now, right now, this minute, they do nothing that is calculated. Now, there is the other side of that. If a dog bites you, if a horse kicks and bites you, there could be something going on. They could have developed a behavior from a past place, or it could be in them genetically. I mean, there's lots of ifs, ands, or buts. It's such a huge subject, Jacob. But in general, I would like to know that people, and I think, you know what, I think they are. I think people are learning to understand animals better. Because back in the day, you know, in my childhood and my teenage years, we knew nothing. We thought the dog pooped in the house on purpose because we knew nothing, because there wasn't the education. And today we are blessed with the fact that we can Google stuff, or we can find somebody who really understands animals and talk to them. You know, it's a much more open forum today. You know what I mean? And we learn so much at Best Friends about how animals think from people who were professionals in that. Again, back years ago, you couldn't do that. There was nowhere to go, no one to talk to. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And where can people find you on the interweb?
The interweb. I know. The dreaded social media. My website is JulietteWatt.com, and that's all one word, JulietteWatt.com. And on there is pretty much lots of stuff. If anyone's interested in coaching, they can get a hold of me that way. Or I also do speaking, lots of speaking engagements on compassion fatigue usually. And if they would like to buy my book, In Between the Magic, that is on there too, and available on Amazon. And, you know, I'd love for people to read it. And then if they could leave a review of their opinion, that really helps me. I like to hear what people think about it, you know, and how it struck them or how they felt. And just all other good stuff. My TED Talk is on there as well. So pretty much everything you need to know.
Absolutely. Now, at the end of every episode, I like to ask the guests for a closing thought. Some says yes, some says no. So do you got a closing thought?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Closing thought.
I still didn't catch that.
You got a closing thought for the people that's listening to the podcast?
Closing thought?
Yeah, thought, yeah.
Yes, sorry. Absolutely, yes, no. If it scares you, do it, because it's going to be a change that you will thank yourself for, and you will feel so proud of yourself for doing. Anything that's scary, like moving or taking up a new job or a new risky adventure, you must do it, because if you don't, you'll regret it when you get older. Don't become a victim of anything. If anything happens to you that is adverse, finish the story. Don't say, well, it's happened, there's nothing I can do. There's always something you can do. Be independent, be strong, take risks. It's very healthy. It's really good and very scary, but very worthwhile. When I first got into an airplane, you guys, I thought I was going to die. that minute because the air bumped a little bit. And the long and the short of it was every time I got into the airplane, I was sick to my stomach with fear. But the end of that story is I became a very accomplished pilot and very proud of myself. So anytime you do anything of great adversity like that you think you can't do, like write a book, whatever, you must do it because the feeling of pride you will get in yourself afterwards is beyond anything that anyone can give to you. You know how people tell you, oh, you're great, this, that, you can't hear that. But when you feel it, when you've done it yourself, then you are great.
How about that? All right. Oh, it's on. Thank you for coming on. Ozona, thank you for coming on the podcast to talk about your book and just talk about, about everything that we covered today.
Yeah, we did.
So I want to thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jacob. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for letting me rattle away here and chat.
It's all right. All right. That's going to do it for this week of the podcast. Tune in next week for another interview. Until then, be safe. God bless, and we'll catch you in the next episode.